Hello and welcome to Fast Forward Newsline. My name is David Kattenberg. With us today to talk about one of the great human health challenges of the 21st century, antibiotic resistance, is Sara Aronson. Hello, Sara.
Hi, Dave. Nice to be here again.
Antimicrobial resistance, increasing concern over the last number of years about the emerging prevalence of strains of bacteria that are resistant to antibiotics and the development of superbugs, which are multiply drug resistant. And one of the concerns is that lots of antibiotics are being prescribed to livestock, and that antibiotic resistance is actually being spread from animals, from cattle and chickens to human beings. Let's talk about this, Sara. First of all, what is antimicrobial resistance?
Okay, well, antimicrobials are any agent that's designed to either kill or stop a microorganism from proliferating. So any kind of microorganism, whether it's a bacteria, a fungus of some kind, any single-celled organism.
So, for example, penicillin.
Yeah, penicillin is a classic example of an antibiotic. And there's all kinds of, besides antibiotics, there's antifungals, and there's also things like alcohol and bleach, things we wouldn't think of as antimicrobials that are useful against these bugs, basically. And when we discovered antimicrobials, it was a huge revolution in medicine, and it allowed us to treat illnesses we couldn't treat before. And the problem is a certain number of microorganisms are just naturally resistant to a particular antimicrobial. It's just because of a mutation that occurs naturally. And what happens is if you have some of those basically resistant bugs in a person or animal, and you treat that person or animal with an antimicrobial, those bugs are going to survive, and all the ones that are vulnerable to the antimicrobial are going to die. And so you're basically giving the ones that were naturally resistant a competitive advantage.
You're selecting for them.
Yeah, it's like artificial selection, like natural selection, but we're doing it artificially, or it's almost it's actually a form of evolution in a lot of ways. It's evolving.
So thus we have lots of strains, or many strains of bacteria that are now resistant to the original form of penicillin that was discovered in 1928. So penicillin is no longer useful against a host of different drugs or a host of different microbes. Where does the use of antibiotics on livestock come in? Because, of course, antibiotic resistance develops within human populations because people are taking antibiotics, and so resistant strains develop inside humans. But now livestock are also administered antibiotics, and there's concern here. Why are livestock treated with antibiotics?
Well, livestock are treated with a lot of antibiotics to begin with. We're talking about 80% of the antimicrobials in Canada are being used on livestock, and I think the number is similar worldwide. And it's really the conditions of factory farming, what people are saying industrialized farming, that are making it necessary to use antimicrobials in such high numbers, because you have a lot of animals and they're in, say, a very confined area like a feedlot, and they're going to get sick. And especially if you bring in young animals, like young calves whose immune systems are immature and they're under a lot of stress because they've just been weaned, they're prone to infection. So antimicrobials are actually used in 4 different ways in agriculture. So they're used to treat a diseased animal when an animal has already gotten sick. They're used to prevent a disease from spreading. So let's say you have some sick animals in a herd. They want to make sure that the healthy animals don't get sick. They're also used to prevent a disease from happening in the first place. Like you have healthy animals, but their conditions of living are such that they're more prone to having disease. And actually, it's not just the overcrowding, it's also the diets that can make it difficult, because cows, their stomachs aren't used to digesting grain. They should be eating grass. It's just not natural. And then the last reason is what's called the production purposes. So to make the animals grow, I believe, faster or bigger, it's for the purposes of basically getting either a lower cost product or getting basically more animal for the same price. So to make things more efficient, basically.
And I have a figure here. In 2007, Health Canada estimated 200,000 kilos of antimicrobials used to treat human beings and 1.6 million used to treat animals. Yeah. And that may be an underestimate because livestock producers aren't obliged to actually, they can obtain their antibiotics in the United States and bring them in. They don't need a prescription, and we don't know how much they're using.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting story, Dave. We're the only country in the world that allows people to just bring in antibiotics for themselves from somewhere else. It's a loophole in our code. Originally it was for people. It was for people vacationing. And let's say, you go to Florida or something and you get sick and someone prescribes you antibiotics. You're allowed to bring your antibiotics back to Canada. It's called the own use, for your own use. And livestock producers have used that own use provision, which is vaguely worded, to say that we can just bring in truckloads of our own antibiotics, and they don't have to justify what they're using them for, what animals they're using them on. And this is made worse by the fact that if a farmer wants to, or a producer of some kind wants to go down to the store and get some antibiotics to put in the feed of his cattle, say, there's no prescription required. People need prescriptions, but cows don't.
Is there any evidence, Sara, to indicate that human beings are contracting antibiotic-resistant infections through transmission from livestock that have been treated with antibiotics? Like antibiotic-resistant bugs found on meat products, for example?
Well, that's actually a good question. Doctors are saying that, there is the potential, and they've seen human beings coming in with infections that they didn't know where they got them from. They're not sort of your normal infections. But you have to really think carefully about this whole issue, because what the livestock producers are saying is, and what I've read in some places, is that the actual types of antibiotics that they're using in animals are not the types that are being used in human medicine. So in theory, like, the bugs that are in the animals aren't developing resistance to human medical antibiotics. At least those are what the claims are.
But this is disputed, because here it says, in this particular article that was published in the Walrus, 2/3 of medications are considered important for human use. 2/3 of medications used to treat livestock are considered important for human use. So the livestock producers associations, of course, deny that.
Yeah, it's a difficult situation, like the Beef Cattle Research Council, for example, and this is just about beef cattle. They're claiming that 90% of what they're using, the antimicrobials on the beef cattle, are actually not being used in human medicine at all, and the other 10%, or so maybe a little under 10% of those, are just the medium importance category of human medications, like ones not used for serious infection, just like for things like acne. That's their claim, right?
But the trouble is, and this idea comes out in the documentary that's sitting right beside this little box, is that microorganisms actually have the ability to develop multiple drug resistance when treated with a given antibiotic. Just one given antibiotic, even something that's not used to treat humans, will actually stimulate the production of resistance mechanisms against other antibiotics that are important for human beings.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, I could see. I've heard of that, and also
they're smart, those microbes.
They can also do other things. They can share antimicrobial resistance amongst each other. Like, they can actually transfer genes back and forth. So bugs that weren't exposed to the antimicrobial will get the genes from other bugs that were.
Right, but and then again, if you treat expose a microbe to antibiotic A, for example, it will then develop resistance to A and B and C and D.
Okay.
So it seems that these claims by the livestock producers are questionable, perhaps. Well, let's talk about the new legislation that's coming in at the end of 2016 to try and regulate this a little more closely. For sure,
yeah. One of the big problems with this whole debate is that we don't have actual information coming from the government about how much antibiotic usage is happening in livestock, because we don't have a surveillance system. And that's one of the changes that's going to happen with the new legislation. And just to give you an idea of the timeline behind this legislation, Health Canada said we needed to take immediate action on this in 2002. And so there was a committee, it was the name of the committee, but it was the Committee on Antimicrobial Resistance Policy and Science. They actually said that we should take action. A bunch of European countries already made some changes in the last while that we're just now making. And the changes that are about to be made will be effective at the end of 2016. And 4 things that I noticed looking at articles in the media. First of all, they're going to eliminate the use of antibiotics for production purposes only.
So the use of antibiotics to stimulate growth will no longer be allowed.
Right. So basically, the labels, it's now no longer a label indication on those drugs. But there's an interesting story behind that, which I could get into, but it was actually stimulated by industry, so it's not as much of a breakthrough as you might think. It's quite complicated, but that's one change. Other changes, you'll need a veterinarian now to approve your orders for antibiotics. You can't just go without a prescription. That's the second change.
You won't be able to go into the United States and buy a prescription, an antibiotic, and bring it back into Canada and use it just like that.
I would gather not, because one of the things they're trying to do is make it tougher to bring those antibiotics into Canada for your own use. And the other thing they're trying to do is, like I was saying earlier, is implement a system of surveillance so the government actually knows what's happening. Like, I think they're already looking at, they already keep track of how much antimicrobials are used in human medicine. There's already numbers on that from the government, but in terms of the livestock, it's really hard to even keep track of it, especially when they're bringing in the drugs like in trucks and you don't know what they're using, how much, when. So those are the legislative changes. And just to give you an idea of what's happening news-wise, if people are interested in this, there was this new website from the Alberta Veterinary Medical Association, Raised with Care, and they are actually saying that it's really important. They're really taking this problem seriously now. They're saying if measures are not taken to slow the growing rate of resistance, we will soon lose access to many of the antimicrobials people and animals depend on to fight bacterial infection and stay healthy.
Sara Aronson, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Dave.
You've been watching Fast Forward Newsline here at Green Planet Monitor website. We are generously supported by the Government of Canada, the Social Justice Fund of Unifor, and the Community Radio Fund of Canada. Join us again next week at this same time. I'm Dave Kattenberg. Bye for now.